Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Equipping Managers to Nurture Psychologically Safe Environments. My name is Melissa, and I will be kicking things off for us today. Let's get started with some brief introductions. Our presenters today are Claude Werder, who is the SVP and Principal HCM Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and Laura Walker, who is the Senior Associate Consultant for Hemsley Frazier. Laura is a recognized specialist in talent, L&D, careers, coaching, and organization effectiveness. She is also an award-winning researcher, author, and coach. As a consultant, Laura brings a wealth of business experience and insight. She led talent, learning and development, and organizational effectiveness teams in respected businesses across 6 different sectors, including retail, John Lewis Partnership, pharmaceuticals, GSK, insurance, Aviva, oil and gas, Centrica, defense, BAE Systems, and luxury goods, Burberry. I would like to extend a thank you to Hemsley Frazier for sponsoring today's webinar. Hemsley Frazier is a complete learning and talent development provider. They have a long-standing reputation as a world-class provider of engaging, performance boosting, and change enabling learning and development services. Noted especially for their award-winning digital content, learning services, leadership development, and large-scale strategic solutions, they are a one-stop shop provider repeatedly chosen by clients for their innovation, agility, world-class design, and results-focused delivery. Through the creation of learning experiences that are tailored and managed for their clients' workforce needs, they believe that talent development, done right, can have a transformative effect on people, organizations, and the experience of work. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we are a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. A quick mention that we currently have several certification programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Leadership Development Strategist program. You can find more information by visiting certification.brandonhall.com. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components of our research. So if you have a few minutes to spare and see any topics that you'd like to take a survey for, it's always greatly appreciated. Links will be available in your handout, and you can always visit brandonhall.com for the latest list. All participants do receive a piece of complimentary research once the results have been analyzed. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to run through a few logistics for today. To ask questions, we ask that you please use the questions panel on your control bar. Today's presentation is being recorded, and we will share a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation via email in roughly 24 hours. If you would like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat momentarily. While on the subject of the chat, it is open for today, so we invite you to join in on today's discussion, share your thoughts as we go through, simply pop in and say hello. Let us know where you're joining in from today. And I see a lot of you have done that already, so welcome. We will be using Mentimeter for polls today. So please have your browser tab, your phone, or any device really, just ready to visit www.menti.com. And without any further delay, I will turn things over to Claude so we can dive right in.
Well, thank you, Melissa, and thanks again to Hemsley Frazier for sponsoring today's webinar. And thanks to all of you for taking time to attend. It looks like we have people from all over the world, so that's great to see. We'll start today with some research on challenges that managers face and how many are reacting. And then Laura is going to provide great guidance on how organizations can address challenges and equip managers to nurture psychological safety. And as Melissa mentioned, we're going to involve you along the way with questions you can answer in the chat or with menti.com. And in fact, we'd like to get going right now and give you a taste of that. So if you want to go to menti.com, try it out. We've got our first question. And that is, how likely are you to speak up in today's session? And again, go to www.menti.com and enter this code 6404 4654 6404 space 4654. And we'll look forward to see what the responses are. And let's see. So it's still coming in, shifting a little bit. But it sounds like a good, almost half of you, 45 to 50% are looking to speak up here and there or as much as possible, and that's great. It's also great if you're here to listen, but as much as you can give us your input, we'd love to hear what you have to say and how you're reacting to what we have to say. So thanks for participating. We'll look for more participation from you. And let's move into our research. So on this next slide, we'll just give you a little data around the topic today, psychological safety and how to help managers nurture it. And this is a great topic, very important and pertinent for today's often chaotic VUCA environment, if you will. We all have changes and challenges on many fronts that we're dealing with. And our research shows that most organizations rate talent retention as their top challenge. Only 31% of organizations believe they're successful at retaining their talent. On the next slide, we asked organizations how the work environment should improve to control talent turnover. And the top three answers were, number one was managers have to connect better with their team members. Two, employees have a greater sense of belonging. They need to have a better sense of belonging to the organization. And three, there needs to be more collaboration between employees. And we believe that psychological safety is really a critical foundation for all of those outcomes and many more, as you'll see. It enables the workplace culture to evolve. So let's first level set on what psychological safety is. So we're all operating on the same definition here. Amy Edmondson of Harvard University defines psychological safety this way: a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. That's simple, straightforward, but extremely powerful in my mind. If managers and their team members, really everyone in an organization, feels less afraid of negative consequences for making mistakes or sharing new and even controversial ideas or conveying candid opinions, which is really needed for good teamwork, it opens up avenues for creativity, communication, collaboration, innovation, engagement, and more. It really creates a foundation for openness that's so important now. On the next slide, just a little graphic to show that the psychological and safety has experienced a huge surge in interest over the last couple of decades due to all sorts of factors: digitalization, big data, artificial intelligence, globalization, terrorism, the political climate, climate change, all sorts of factors that impact people both inside and outside the workplace has made psychological safety a bigger topic. On the next slide, there's a wealth of evidence to support the importance of psychological safety. This is from Project Aristotle from Google, and it just shows you many of the reasons that it matters: enhanced productivity, safety improvements, creativity and innovation, as I mentioned, better problem solving. It just creates a foundation for openness and interactivity that is just so important. And if people don't feel safe in doing that, they will hold back, and that hurts everybody. So on this next slide, we believe managers have a huge role to play in creating a psychologically safe environment. And they, the managers, also need to feel psychologically safe in order to meet their many responsibilities. Our research shows managers often struggle, because 57% of responding organizations to our research believe their managers can successfully drive business results over the next 2 years. Only about 1/3 of employers believe that they're adequately preparing their managers to do good work and excel in the future of work. Given their workload, on this next slide, we asked managers about their top challenges in developing the skills they need to be successful. And as this slide shows, about 3/4 said they have so many responsibilities and tasks that they need to attend to that they have little or no time in a day to improve themselves. More than 2/3 said it's difficult for them to make themselves a priority when they already have so much to do for others. So we've conducted many interviews with managers in the past year as part of our leadership development research. Now, not all managers, of course, feel under the gun, but these two quotes that we are showing here are pretty typical of the reaction managers have when they're asked about situations. A mid-level manager at a software company said, "I sometimes feel like I can't win. I'm told I need leadership training, so I spend 3 days away from my job at training. When I come back, I'm so far behind that I don't have time to follow up. And after a few days, it's like the training never happened." Or a supervisor at a plant, a manufacturing plant. "I don't have time to learn. I'm buried in work and I have a team of 10 to keep track of. Training is just another distraction that takes me away from doing my job." But like I said, not everybody feels that way, but a lot of managers we talk to really feel under the gun, and that keeps them from feeling psychologically safe and keeps them from doing what they can to nurture psychological safety. So no question, many managers feel under the gun. And as this slide shows, managers struggle to demonstrate behaviors that lead to a productive and collaborative workplace. The top bar shows the most frequent behavior of managers is valuing their employees. Now, at first glance, that sounds pretty positive until you realize that means that 1/3 or so of managers don't value their employees. And that obviously is a problem. Then if you can read down the chart, I won't go through the whole thing, but if you jump down to the bottom 2 bars, only about 1/4 of organizations believe their managers support employees in pursuing career goals or providing coaching and feedback that's so necessary for productivity and collaboration, innovation, and skill improvement. So this data on the next slide shows that 70% of organizations believe all the 12 leadership and management competencies shown in the slide need to improve. That's a lot of improvement, a lot of things that organizations feel their managers need. And they include things like emotional intelligence, accountability, unconscious bias awareness, collaboration, and other skills that are so important in building the environment of psychological safety. But training isn't everything. I mean, training is important to help managers improve, but it's not the only answer. And given all the responsibilities heaped upon them and how many managers feel about their situation, some employers are beginning to realize that they need to look at how managerial jobs are structured and whether they can do a better job of enabling managers to work more closely with their employees and enable a safe environment. More organizations are seeing managers first and foremost as talent developers. And they need to be freed up, right, from those other responsibilities as much as they can to focus on developing their teams and helping them succeed. Rethinking management structures can take various forms. We talked to some organizations that are adding assistant managers or creating more administrative support. Not all organizations can add headcount to do that. Others are focusing on automation, for instance, to do some administrative tasks and other functions that often take managers away from developing their people. I want to share just one example before I turn it over to Laura, and she's going to show you ways to equip managers to nurture the psychological safety. But on this next slide, we have the case of TD Bank, based in Canada, won a Brandon Hall Group Excellence Awards for creating a culture of manager coaching in their call centers. And their call center managers experienced many of the challenges we've just described. Training did not seem to help them improve call center performance. So the bank took it upon themselves to really study how managers were functioning, what their pain points were, what was taking their time, what was keeping them from supporting their employees. Then they used a combination of automation and transferring some administrative responsibilities to free managers to coach their call center agents. This took a while. It wasn't done overnight. It took a lot of design thinking and focus groups and different things. It took about a year to accomplish, but the results were pretty incredible. Call center metrics increased exponentially. Both managers and the call center agents reported a significant shift in the work environment. Engagement scores soared, turnover rates declined. So this type of reimagination of how managers function is not possible in some organizations. In fact, many of folks, companies we've talked to have told us that there's no way that their companies would consider such a change. But some sort of change is needed in many cases to equip managers to nurture the psychological safety required to drive business results, collaboration, and more. So Laura and Hemsley Fraser have developed excellent ways to address these challenges. And along the way, of course, we'll ask for your comments and input. Also, feel free to submit questions anytime, and we'll address them as we go, or we'll do it at the end, toward the end of the webinar. Laura, all yours.
Brilliant. Thanks, Claude. I think you've laid out the challenge very clearly there, and some of the issues that organizations and managers are facing, even more so than ever. So what I'm going to shift gear now slightly and take you through some things that organizations are already doing to address some of these challenges and share those with you. And then we'll also share with you a framework that you can use and to give to your managers that can help them with this issue. So a very practical thing that you can take away from today's session. So I've got some insight first to share with you, and then I'll move on to the framework that you can use. First and foremost, the thing to bear in mind about addressing these challenges, as we've just heard from Claude, is that this is a systemic issue. So it's not just about equipping managers in the sense of sending them on training courses. It's much broader. And what we're suggesting here is that you have to have a multifaceted response to this challenge. If you think about it, organizations are complex social systems, or if you like to prefer to think about it as an ecosystem. So just working on one small part of it, or equipping one manager or one creature in this case of an ecosystem, isn't going to shift the whole. You have to pay attention to several things beyond the manager that will then help them. So we're saying that, and what we've experienced is that you need to pay attention to the manager, but also how they interact with the team, but also the wider organization, and to intervene across 3 dimensions around their capacity, as well as their capability and their confidence. So I'm going to move to briefly share with you some examples of what organizations are doing on those 3 things. So on capacity, capability, and confidence. So for each of those, I'm going to give you a couple of insights first, and then share some proven strategies that organizations I've been working with have done. So the first thing to know about capacity is what we're trying to do is to create an increase in residual capacity, so spare capacity that managers have to deal with issues and challenges, essentially, which you can either do by increasing their capacity or by reducing wasted effort, basically. And as we touched on, from an ecosystem point of view, you have to address both the formal aspects of the system, so that might be structural elements or process elements, but also informal elements around the system, so around how behaviours are in the organisation, the culture, if you like, but also around ways of working that aren't necessarily formalised. So if you just over-address the formal stuff, you'll miss a lot of the opportunity, and things will just happen as they always have anyway. So you have to pay attention to both. And what organizations I've worked with, not just as an employee, but also as a consultant, have tried are these sorts of things. So around job design, I've seen a couple of organizations here. So one in a retail partnership and one in a pharmaceutical commercial function, where they have created additional capacity for managers by putting people alongside the manager to pick up some of the responsibilities. So it might be, in this case, they have a team coach. So we had managers who had very broad spans of control, 24 people, for example, plus, and they had a team coach who helped people develop their skills. Other organizations are turning to automation or efficiency around process improvements to try and reduce the workload that is on managers. So around introducing better HR systems, for example, changing processes around things like expense authorizations, so that there's less workload on the manager, particularly around the administrative aspects. And one aspect that I really enjoyed in this energy company here was they had a campaign which was led from head office, and it was called Reduce the Noise. So the idea was that it was a very, a bit like air traffic control for any communication that came from head office to the frontline service engineers. So these are people who are out fixing boilers in people's homes, and they radically reduce the amount of bombardment that these managers got from the front line, so they could spend the time with their teams and helping them to succeed. And the third aspect here is really around making it matter. So if you don't have a conversation in your organization about psychological safety and people know that it matters, it's unlikely to gain traction in the overall system. And I've got an example here of a global specialist engineering company, and they were so passionate about psychological safety. They measure how they're doing quarterly. So they introduced it into their business reviews, their quarterly business reviews. It's not just an HR activity, it's an embedded part of their organizational review that they do every quarter. Okay, so we've now got some additional ideas for you about what other people are doing around capability. Now, we obviously in L&D, we talk about capability a lot, but we obviously need to remember it's not just about sending people on training courses. So what I've certainly found in my history is you can keep sending people on the same course, like coaching skills, for example, and it doesn't mean that they coach anymore for all the reasons that Claude said earlier on, those managers experiencing that overload for all those different reasons. You have to work on their readiness, so they're around, do they have the capacity, etc., but also their ability. And how we develop people really matters as well. So there's an opportunity around the revolution we've seen in online learning, but it's not the answer. So it shouldn't be online only. It should be digital first, but not digital only, essentially, is a strategy that I'm hearing a lot around different organizations. Some practical things that people are doing is really focusing on well-being first. So there's some nice work that you might want to look up from the Inclusive Leadership company, and they basically have found some really interesting research that even around inclusion and psychological safety, managers need to look after themselves first. If you're not well, you are unlikely to be inclusive in how you lead. If you are unwell, as in not at your best, you are unlikely to be creating a psychologically safe environment for your team. You have to put your own oxygen mask on first. Another organisation is spelling out very clear expectations of managers, and what they call it is a people manager promise. So it's this idea that there's 3 or 4 things in this case of this company that all people managers do, and it's a promise to their teams around what their approach is. Really clear expectations. You don't have to second guess. And the key thing around learning, Hemsey Fraser, this is our philosophy around learning. So we have our 4 E's approach to any learning that we design, and we design learning so it is exciting, engaging, that people have the opportunity to embed the learning, and then obviously we evolve it as we go. And then the third area I wanted to touch on before we move on to the model is around confidence. So you might create the capacity and the capability, but again, as I said, it doesn't mean that people have the beliefs or the opportunity or the desire, I guess, to actually introduce it. And one of the things we don't talk about a lot in organizations is fear. And there's a fascinating relationship between confidence and fear, particularly in organizations. They can be quite scary places to be sometimes, because there are consequences to how we are. And, it's not without interpersonal risk. As we talked about, psychological safety is about interpersonal risk, and there are risks in organizations that I'm sure we're all very familiar with. And the other thing to know is that confidence is not one thing. I've discovered through my research, that I include this in my book as well, is that confidence is actually 3 levels. So you have self-worth. So am I worthy of respect or being listened to in this context? What's my self-esteem like? So am I a credible person in this environment? And am I good at my job? That will affect whether you're likely to speak up. And self-efficacy, which is much more around, can I do this thing? So around the task or the things that I'm being asked to do. So do I have enough information to be able to speak up? And that's a fascinating element around confidence, is to intervene and to help people in the right way. And obviously how you would intervene for each of those 3 levels might be a bit different. Practical examples, again, just briefly. Burberry, in this case, I can say this, we did some work around the shadow of the leader, so that leaders can understand the impact that they have on their teams. And that can be really illuminating, positive as well as negative. So I think a lot of leaders are hard on themselves around what they're doing, but actually their teams, depending on what's going on, they can actually be a lot more encouraging. Leadership teams, in my experience, are one of the most challenging environments psychologically safe, from a psychological safety point of view. And this organization, a global financial services company, did some work around creating a thinking environment in their leadership team meetings. So they introduced a structure based on Nancy Klein's work to help people know how to intervene and how to be at their best in those leadership meetings. And that worked very well. And they then took that to their teams, which was a nice flow through. And then in terms of safe practice, so the opportunity for them to practice what they're learning around psychological safety, this insurance company set up manager learning groups, which is like action learning sets, basically, where managers can bring real challenges that they're facing in this area, and they can get input and support from other people in the same position. So a very simple thing to introduce, but something that works very well. I've seen it in a few different places in different guises, and this is a great example here. Okay, thank you very much. Now we're going to shift gear, and as I promised you, we will give you a tool or a framework that you can take away to help equip your managers. You can also use it as HR professionals or L&D people if you're in that field, to help you very practically create an environment of psychological safety within your team. So this is focused a bit more specifically around capability, but it also touches on some of the other things that we have mentioned. So we're going to deep dive into each of the 5 aspects here that you can see in the framework. It's deliberately organized around the acronym SPEAK, because essentially that's what it's about. So it's about helping people to be able to speak up and feel safe to speak up. So the acronym is SPEAK. So it's nice and easy for you to remember. And we're just going to touch on each of the elements. And this is where we're going to invite you to get involved again to the level that you want to. So in a nice and safe, non-attributed way, of course. Okay, so we're going to dive into the first aspect of the framework. If you are interested in reading more about this, we will provide a link in the chat where you can link through to a site where you can find out a lot more about this framework and about the context behind it. So the first S in the framework stands for set the scene. So first off, for any manager or for anybody creating a team, a learning team or a project team or any sort of team actually, is around making sure that people understand why they're doing what they're doing. So we know as adults, we learn best when we know why we're learning something, why we're doing something, and we can see the relevance of what we're doing. As human beings, we also have a bias to the status quo. So we need to know that it's okay to disrupt the status quo, and it's the norm and the expectation that people will speak up and feel able to do so, and to create sufficient stretch in a team. So psychological safety and being sufficiently psychologically safe is not necessarily about being comfortable. Because sometimes speaking up can be about challenging power or saying something really important around a safety issue, for example. So it is not about it's not about being comfortable per se, but it is about having high standards and being clear about what they are and caring enough about the work and the team to have high standards of performance. So we'd love to hear from you in the chat. So any tips that you'd share with each other? So as much as we're sharing our insights with you, I think you can also have the opportunity to share your experiences with each other. What would be a top tip for encouraging mistakes, or people to feel it was okay to make a mistake, and to destigmatize failures or things that we've learned from that haven't gone brilliantly? What would be your top tips? Just pop those in the chat. Nice one. I've just seen pop up from Nicole. That's speak of your own. Absolutely. Yeah. Did you see that?
Share a failure or mistake and what you learned from it. One. Focusing on we're all learning here, kind of making that statement.
Yeah.
John talked about common understanding around receiving feedback, so everybody understands what's expected. Tone and delivery of corrections and mistakes is critical, says Crystal. Working toward mutual purpose would be another way to handle it.
Brilliant.
A lot of good things coming in on the chat.
Yeah. See, I love this. So when we have the chance to think about it, we probably know a lot of the things that we can do, and maybe it's just, you know, having that space, the capacity to think about what we want to do. Awesome. Okay, so should we keep going and move on to our P? So in the speak framework, the second aspect is about place. And there's two main elements to this. So the first is really linked to inclusion. So people in the team knowing that it's okay for me to be here now with these people. I know where I fit. I have a sense of belonging and inclusion, as we say here. So it's about a felt sense of having place. And then the second aspect, which is particularly pertinent given the changes we've had around new ways of working, is around the physical environment. And that's really important to safety. So not assuming that my version of a safe environment is the same as Claude's, for example. So he might really feel safer in a coffee shop, for example, or I might feel safer in a quiet environment. So really paying attention to the environments that we're in, and what we do best in those different environments. So we promised we'd be going back to menti.com. So we're going to do that now. We've got a little quiz for you. So we've got 3 questions, and this is just to help really crystallize our understanding and our perspective on place. Here we go. We can see people popping in nicely anonymously. I just love these shapes. Okay. We're getting towards our max that we can actually see on the screen.
I think on the initial poll, we had about 30 people. So we'll give 15, 20 more seconds just for everybody to join.
Okay, brilliant. So for ease, obviously, you can see the code highlighted at the top. Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Okay, so first question. What difference do inclusive managers make to job satisfaction? So do inclusive managers make a difference of 1.4 times higher job satisfaction, or 2.4 times higher, or 3.4 times higher? You have to be quick on this. There you go. So most people got that right. So inclusive managers and so psychologically safe managers make a difference of 3.4 times higher. Thank you. So our second question.
Bear with me 2 seconds. It doesn't seem to want to
So
go to the next question.
Yeah, there's usually the little arrow bottom left, isn't there? There we go. It popped up then. There we are. Nice. Thank you. Hiding. Okay, second question. What percentage of people report poor mental health when they don't have the same access or access to the same opportunities and privileges as others? Is it 45%, 55%, or 65%? What percentage report poor health, mental health? Super quick, that one. So yeah, 55% of people report poor mental health when they don't have the same access as others. So over half. So the relative expectation of opportunity and the equivalence of that is really important. So feeling that you have a place, that you are listened to, that you have opportunity is a really important part. Thank you. Lovely. And our final question for this little mini quiz. Workers in an inclusive team are how much more likely to report their workplace as safe and supportive compared with non-inclusive? Is that 45%, 55%, or 65%? Indeed. So again, over half. So workers in an inclusive team are twice as likely, basically, to report their workplace as safe and supportive for mental health issues or not, as the case may be. Cool. Okay. So place really matters in terms of inclusion, and that's felt sense of inclusion as well as the practicalities. Okay, let's have a look at our next one. So the E in speak relates to engage. So there are a couple of things here. So inviting team members to make sense of what matters to them. So recognizing that as much as we might have a shared purpose, how people connect with that purpose will vary. So recognizing that individuals' connections with goals or a purpose or a task will vary. So being really interested in that and helping people to make sense of that. And then the second thing about engage, we've touched on it briefly around our 4 E's model, is that learning in the flow of work. So learning happens all the time in work, especially in a new and changing environment, not just in learning programs, for example, or sessions like this, is that learning needs to be engaging by design. And as I said, our 4 E's model gives us a really nice process for making sure that's embedded in all of our learning. So it'd be nice if you could use it too. So we're popping back to Menti for a quick poll. So if you can jump on with your codes. Cool. So we can see here, what are the top barriers to learning in your organization? So if you can pick 3 from that multiple choice that you have. Getting a clear message here. Brilliant. Thank you to those of you involved here. That's great.
Interesting.
Brilliant. So this is based on a survey that we run every year around the top trends, just so you know, and it's very consistent with other surveys that we've seen from other learning organisations as well, actually. So these are the top general barriers. So it looks like we're getting a really clear message around time and resource. So we talked about our busy managers. So I'm sure they're part of that population that we're seeing there. Also in terms of buy-in and resistance. So maybe people not seeing that it's as relevant or as important perhaps as some of the other things that they've got going on. Obviously budget and costs, particularly pertinent probably right now. And learning culture, it just not really being part of what we do around here might be one aspect of that. But some very clear messages there. Okay, thank you. So this is why we know that engage really matters. So there's a lot of pressures against learning and against developing and growing and being at your best in an organization. So making it as engaging and as appealing as possible is a really key part of psychological safety. A relates to activate. So this is about really making action. So not just talking about psychological safety, actually moving on it. So it's not a spectator sport. So managers can't expect it to happen. They are a role model. So a shadow, I talked about earlier on, the shadow of the leader. A little structure does go a long way. So around making time to plan and innovate together, or maybe a structure in a team meeting around managing and sharing out airtime, so that people know that they're expected to speak up but feel safe, that they know how the process works, and they know that their thought, opinion, whatever it happens to be, will be listened to. But also recognise, appreciate people who do speak up and address clear violations. So if people are cutting other people down or making it feel unsafe in a team, a really important role that we have as managers. And I certainly take this very seriously, although it's never quite easy to do, but it is something that's really important to address straightforwardly if things aren't happening. And again, we'd love you to add in your chat, and this is your opportunity to give a shout out to who is your role model. So who is it that you think about in your present or your past? It might be in your wider life, or it might be in your organization. Who is a role model for activating psychological safety? So who steps up and role models that for others? So yeah, let's have some of those shout outs. It's quite nice. They're coming in. Thanks, Leanne. Professional coach. Yeah.
Professional coach. Peers on a committee. A former manager from my youth.
Yeah. They stick with you, don't they? When you've got those role models from early on in your career, they really stick with you.
A previous line manager.
Yeah. Cool.
Previous manager.
Mentoring is a really fascinating one with this. It comes out quite a lot. Yeah, because you've got that distance in a way, and that there's still a vested interest, but actually it's a slightly different relationship, isn't it? Which is great. Okay, let's just briefly touch on our final one, and then we'll be able to open things up for any questions that we've got. Thank you for those still going in the chat. And our K stands for knowing, but also not knowing. I mean, you may have read about this term being a not knower, and this comes through in some of Amy Edmondson's work. So she's obviously been researching this subject for about 30 years. For a lot of managers, it's quite difficult to be a not knower, especially if you've come through a specialist route. But then actually, when they get used to it, it can be quite liberating. So you can stoke their curiosity about other people's opinions or experiences or perspectives, and encourage them to pull together a diverse group of people for a project, for example, early on. Another bit about knowing is really getting to know the team and encouraging them to get to know each other, and taking time to get to know people's stories, but also their unique strengths, and experimenting with ways of making the most of those strengths. Because when we're playing to our strengths, we generally feel more able and safe as a result. And then the other thing about knowing is knowing how you're doing around psychological safety. So the good thing is there's some very robust measures about psychological safety now, some great tools that you can use, survey tools particularly, that have got some very well-established questions that are very validated. So you can keep track of how you're doing, but also know that it is not a one and done. So things will shift in any system. So it is something that you need to keep paying attention to how you are doing. Okay, thank you very much. So that's our Speak framework. The link is in the chat if you want to find out more.
Just sorry to interrupt. There is one more question just on the previous slide, just as a one final Mentimeter.
I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you, Sam. Sorry, I was on a roll. Thank you for speaking up. That's helpful. People are going in already, so they're ahead of me. They know.
We're all ready.
Yeah, awesome. So you've got a little quiz for you just to finish off and a little hi.
Just give it 10 more seconds again, just to make sure everybody has the opportunity to join.
As you're doing that, just encourage people to weigh in with any questions that you may have, so we can handle them in the last few minutes.
Brilliant. Thank you. Multitasking, this is good.
Give it 5 more seconds and then we'll start with the final quiz.
I love that we've got a snowman already. Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so question number 1, 3 again. What percentage of US employees strongly agree that their opinions seem to count at work? What percentage? Is it 30, 40, or 50? Their opinions strongly count at work. Well, we know we've got a challenge.
Yeah.
30%. And we know we've got that challenge. So yes, 30% of US employees. Okay, question 2. Are you ready? Diverse teams make what percent better decisions? Is it 67%, 87%, or 97%? Diverse teams make what percentage better decisions? Correct, 87%. I think we've probably all seen that research. It's a good reminder, though, I think, for all of us to have that diversity in our teams and to make the most of that diversity. And then our final question around knowing. The need for meaning increases during life, but when does it peak? Is it 40 to 50, 50 to 60, or beyond 60? So we talk about meaning early on in careers, but when does it peak? Yes. So the need for meaning increases throughout our working lives and increases about 65. Or beyond 65 in some cases. So the point being that if you don't pay attention to meaning or get to know people, what gives them meaning as a manager, you probably will miss it. And certainly as we go through our careers, it becomes more and more important. And that's one of the main reasons that people check out of organizations. They don't see why they're there anymore. So that getting to know people is really important. Okay. Sorry, thank you, Sam, for that. I think those questions were worth it. I thought it was good.
Yeah. So now we've got a little time for you to, if you're curious about things that we've covered or things we haven't covered, love to hear from you and answer as many as we can. One question that came in, Laura, is related to, I think, the last slide about employees believing their opinions count. What can managers do to help them convince them that their opinions do count?
Well, what I think I've experienced, or what I have experienced, is a couple of things. So I think something that's really important is about timing. So if you're early on in a thought process and people genuinely know that you're working on something, but it's still a work in progress, or you're still at that input stage of something, it really helps because they know that it's going to make a difference, or they have more faith that it will make a difference. I think that the honest answer is that it's about what managers do. It's not about what they say. So just saying that your opinion counts isn't enough. They actually need to act on it. and to be able to demonstrate that. Walk the talk, absolutely, Shem, completely agree. You actually have to do it. You can't just talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing that I've tried, I think, and experienced is when people come to you to talk about something, if you can push it back on them, what do you think?
Yeah.
What are your ideas? And if you do that consistently, I think over time, that sends a message.
Yeah, it does.
Let's see, we've got some questions and comments coming in. Shem asked, they're interested in sharing who you consider to be the leading researcher or leading research in psychological safety, as well as best practices, that type of thing.
Well, I think from my perspective, the leading researcher is Amy Edmondson in this space. So she's been, as you said, at Harvard Business School, working on this topic one way or another for over 30 years. She's written fascinating books in this space, including the Fearless Organization, which I don't necessarily agree with the whole concept that you can ever have a fearless organization, but what a great ambition. But I don't necessarily feel that I've ever experienced that in reality. But yeah, really good. And also in her book, that's where I think there was another question about some of the measures and survey questions that you can use. There's a lot there, but actually there's a lot in the public domain as well about different questions that you can use to assess how psychologically safe people are feeling in your teams or in your organization.
Well, let's see, we have Tan May ask, can we get some insight into some metrics that might measure psychological capacity?
Capacity?
Yeah, or maybe, well, that's what she said, maybe capability or psychological safety.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it is capacity, because we were talking about capacity. And I think psychological capacity is an interesting one. So I was talking about residual capacity, which is a psychological state. So in psychology, we do have a term called residual capacity, which is basically what, for example, when you're learning to drive, the process of driving takes up all of your residual capacity. When you get used to it and when you get practiced at it and it becomes a habit, you then have extra residual capacity to deal with things that happen. So it doesn't mean, so you're not necessarily more accident prone per se when you're first learning to drive. It's just that you don't have enough residual capacity to deal with things. So one of the things that can really help around psychological residual capacity is to help ingrain habits so that people get really used to things and it doesn't take up additional capacity for them to think about, so how do I run this team meeting in a way that is psychologically safe? So if you can help people with prompts or pointers. So there's an organization I've worked in and we produce conversation cards, which are simple cards, little reference points for different types of conversations that managers are having. So it might be a half-year review. Here's a conversation card to help you have that conversation, or giving and receiving feedback. What are some of the prompts that you can have around that? So it just helps managers create a bit of capacity so they don't have to think about it every single time about how to do it, or if they're having a different sort of conversation they've not had before, it just helps give them a little bit more space. And I'm hoping that's what you were asking.
Okay, let's see, they keep coming in. This is an interesting one. Can psychological safety work in a team knowing that outside that team, the organization is very political?
Is very, sorry, I missed that last word.
Sorry?
I missed the last word, sorry, Claude.
Can psychological safety work in a team knowing that outside the team, the organization is very political?
Okay, got it. Yeah. Well, yeah. What do you think, Claude?
Well, in my former life as an executive and leaders of large teams, I think it's a mixed bag. I've certainly worked in the environment where I tried to create psychological safety, and I felt the team felt psychologically safe, but the rest of the organization was much different. And I think it has limited effectiveness because you don't work in a vacuum. And so the team might function very well, but it might not play very well in the rest of the organization. And they may be, when they go outside the team, the level of psychological safety may be very different and really can come back and swat them in the head, so to speak. So I think it's difficult. It's possible to some degree, but I think that the reason that this is so difficult is it's really not as effective if it's done in pockets. It really needs to be organization wide. It doesn't really work.
It does, exactly. And because we talked about it being a systemic challenge around equipping managers, and I think that's certainly the case around this. I have seen some success where you can work within a part of an organization. So if we're working in large organizations, you do have subcultures just naturally in business units, for example. It kind of depends on the level of interaction and the level of interference, if you like, from different parts of the organization into the other parts. In this day and age, we're not an island, very unusually, if we are. So there's a lot of interconnections between parts of organizations. So I think it is even more challenging now, if that's the case. But one of the things we have found in some other research that we did around people management is an interesting pattern. So managers' behavior, what they do as managers, is affected by their manager. So that has a really strong relationship, and they either mirror those behaviors, interestingly, or deliberately don't. So they take a lot of their clues around their manager. Their manager's manager and beyond, in a very hierarchical organization, they have less of a direct impact on the manager's behavior per se, but they do cast a shadow about what matters, what's important, what's the nature of things around here. So it's less about the impact on their behavior, but more of a generalized message about what matters and what's important and what's okay here. So it's an interesting dynamic that it does have an effect, but it's a slightly different effect at different points in the organization.
Here's another dynamic, somewhat similar to discuss. What if some managers, I guess within an organization, are supporting their teams and providing psychological safety, and some are not? What do you do? I guess it's the leader of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, from an internal consulting point of view, a lot of my career was about internal consultancy, and I liked internal consultancy because you can work with different parts of the organization and not just be drawn in on a commission, if you like. And one of the things that I like about that is you can go with where the energy is. So if you've got a part of the organization that is committed to psychological safety, a manager or a team or a sub part of the organization, one of the things that I think you can do that's quite smart is work with them and then stoke the interest of others in that work. So you can prove the concept in one part of the organization and then stoke the fear of missing out in other parts of the organization. So if they see the benefit of something happening elsewhere, they can then ask you to help them with that work because they've seen the benefit of it. So I think certainly in large organizations, it would be very difficult to bring about a shift in totality, but you can create some movement, even if it's not a 100% perfect situation.
A couple more. I'm paraphrasing this question a little bit. She was curious about measuring psychological safety. If survey results come back negative for a leader, what's the logistics of trying to help that person, engaging HR, that type of thing? What is a good practice for them?
So if they get low results around psychological safety, about what happened? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it is a good question. I mean, I think well, it depends on the type of the organization, the size of the organization. But I think where you can create the environment beyond an individual team, there are opportunities to speak up beyond that individual team, so that you can create a desire or a momentum for a manager to listen for whatever reason. I think it is quite difficult. So if you're in a team where your manager isn't fostering that climate, what do? Because your natural first point would be to talk to your manager. But obviously, in networked organizations, which most are now, there are ways and means of having conversations in a way that can be constructive to help foster that interest. But I think it's a challenging one. This is what I mean by fear in organizations. It can be quite interesting to try and navigate that and to find people who have the legitimacy to help you on that journey. I think it is about spotting those people around the organization who can help in that circumstance, who have a role, for example, that is a bit more defined in that space.
I think some organizations are beginning to deal with these kind of things, not just for psychological safety, but other leadership and management issues by trying to provide more coaching for leaders, either internally or an external coach, and try to help them through some of these things as well. And we've done a lot on coaching, and I think that is a trend that is growing. So we're right at the top of the hour. I'll ask one quick question that you should be able to give a very quick answer to. Laura, what is the name of your book?
Oh, I can. It's called Dancing with Fear and Confidence. There you go. And it's really for people who are transitioning in their career.
Well, thank you, everybody. We want to end pretty much on time. Thank you for participating. A warm thank you to Laura and Hemsley Fraser for their sponsorship and the great content they provide. Thanks to all of you for taking the time and participating so actively. We'll see if there's any questions we haven't gotten to and try to give you answers offline. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day or evening, and we look forward to seeing you again in another webinar. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.